All right, ready?
Ready.
Do I have to, intro it? Hey guys, welcome back. For this part of this series, we're going to be talking through the ingredients of beer. So, whilst we go through these ingredients, what my true goal is that not that you guys are like, cool, I'm going to go gangbusters and start brewing beer, but what I do want you guys to walk away with the knowledge of is that you understand how more or less of one ingredient can change the flavor of your beer, so that ideally, when we can go back to the pubs, you can definitely, with confidence, order a beer that you're going to enjoy, okay? That's all this portion is about. I want you guys to have the tools to know what you like and what you don't like. Firstly, let's talk about what are the ingredients in beer. So way back in 1516, the Germans finalized their Reinheitsgebot. I'm not German, but I'm pretty sure I said that kind of close, unsure. And the Reinheitsgebot is translated to the German purity law. And the German purity law states that we can use 4 ingredients in our beer: water, malt, hops, and yeast. I'm going to take breaks so that you can cut and edit and blah blah. We'll start with malt. Malt, I think, is the most elusive one of the bunch. And when a lot of us think of malt, we might think of a few things. So we might think of Maltesers, delicious. Malt extract in milkshakes, also pretty bloody good. Whiskey, or maybe Milo. So the reason why we come to a struggle when we try to visualize malt is because it's not an actual thing. It's actually a process that we do to a grain. So beer is fermented grain. You can use literally whatever you like. Here in Byron Bay, we might start using like quinoa and buckwheat and spelt and all that jazzy stuff. But just kidding. Predominantly, brewers are using a combination of barley, wheat, and rye. So the process of malting basically is a form of mimicking nature and the process of germination. So imagine, these are all 3 different grains of barley. And this is a little kernel of barley, and in its natural state, barley would live somewhere in a beautiful, glorious field or on a long stalk, swaying triumphantly in the wind. One day that little kernel would drop into the earth, then it would rain, and at that point, basically the rain awakens the enzymes that are within the husk of the grain, and it basically starts to form all these starches and sugars that give the grain so much energy that it actually bursts, and from that little burst is where it would sprout and then grow again into a new plant. Germination, think like year 7 science. So now, because that would be an incredible waste of time to try to wait for these little barley grains to drop out of the sky, the process of malting involves tricking the grain into germinating. So maltsters, and a lot of our malt comes from Burston Malting up in Brisbane. And what they do is they go out, they harvest barley out of the fields, they bring it back to their sheds, they lie it out, they steep it, pour some water all over it, and the grain's like, sweet, I'm gonna grow, I'm gonna get all juiced up, grow into a big barley plant. When it puffs up into being filled with all of that starch, all of that natural sugars, that's when the maltster will actually stop the process. They'll dehydrate the grain, and we'll pause it there. Are the boys super loud? Can you guys shut up? Did I kick your dog? You look like I kicked your dog. Anyway, where do I start from? I was on a fucking roll. Yeah, anyway, I don't know where we were because it was just super loud in here. So we'll start again. But at some point, can you guys also shut up? Shut up! So if you crack open a grain of barley, maybe with your teeth, you can see that it's all kind of white powder. And that is actually the natural sugar. That's why you don't need to add any sugar into your beer. And that natural sugar is really great for our 4th ingredient, which is the yeast, which we'll talk about in a bit. So once you've malted your grain and it's full of that sweetness, you then have the option to chuck it into a roasting drum. So if all 3 of these grains of barley would have started out the same color, the longer that you put it into a roasting drum, and imagine like coffee roasting drum, yeah? So it's warming it up, the sugars that are on the inside are caramelizing, they're becoming a little bit sweeter, to the point of then actually cooking down into bitter or burnt or almost coffee chocolate-like. And it allows us this kind of rainbow of flavors and colors of malt for the brewer to choose from. So starting with something very, very pale and ranging to jet black, when we think about what malt we're going to use, that's when we're actually depicting, is it going to be a pale beer using a pale malt? Or will it become a little bit more amber, heading towards a little bit deeper gold? Or will it then go quite red? So the malt will depict the color of the beer, and it will also depict the backbone of flavor. So with something that's really lightly roasted, you'll have this beautiful sourdough, bread-like, almost fresh sourdough flavor and aroma. When you go into something a little bit toasted, you get crackers, bread crust, graham cracker, and into something like this one where you actually get a little bit of caramelization, a little bit of toast, a little bit heading into the realm of chocolate and coffee. So again, malt, color, backbone of flavor from which we'll build, and then the natural sugars for the yeast to consume. That's a lot of info. Are we going? Okay, cool. Okay, so that is malt done. Next, let's move on to water. So water is a really important ingredient in beer, and it also makes up about 95% of the actual gravity in beer as well. Now, traditionally, where you lived geographically and what sort of water supply you had to deal with would depend on what style of beer that you would brew. For example, harsh water supplies are better suited to certain styles of beer, whereas soft water supplies, such as Pilsen in the Czech Republic, is beautiful for making something like a light lager, like a Pilsner. Nowadays, it's a little bit different because we've got the ability to strip out water for any potential impurities as it comes into the brewery, and then you can add back a tincture of brewer's salts, which will either create a harsh or soft water supply depending on what we're going to brew. It's pretty simple. Water's pretty simple and important. Straight on. Hops are probably my favorite ingredient to talk about because I think the word hops is just thrown around a lot when we talk about beer. But when we actually think about it, okay, what are hops? Hops are actually a cousin of hemp and of cannabis. So they grow on vines with a B, which is very similar to vines with a V. And they grow really high and climb up these trellises. And so in Australia, we've got some down in Tassie, South Australia and Victoria, and then other cold temperate climates all over the world. So they grow like soft, squishy little pine cones, and when you harvest them, which is typically annually, you can then powderize them and grind them down and press them into pellets, which is like what we have here. And if you compare hops to grapes with wine, basically all the major hop growing regions of the world, because of different soil, wind patterns, climate and all of that, they produce strains of hop that are flavor and aromatically very different from one another. So Australia's hops tend to be really fruity and floral, whereas let's say West Coast USA, they've got really piney, resiny hops. And then you jump over into, say, England, and they've got very, again, herbal, spicy, floral hop characteristics and profile and aroma. So hops give us obviously flavor and aroma, which I've already alluded to so far. The second thing that they give us is bitterness. So hops have essential oils, which provide that flavor and aroma, but they also have alpha acids. And when you agitate and boil alpha acids, we get that at the end in bitterness. Bitterness is essential because, as you know, all of our malt is full of sugar. So that's really, really important to have something that's bitter to balance out that sweetness so that our beer is palatable, approachable, and sessionable. The last thing that hops give us is they're actually the natural preservative in our beer, which is really, really important because we don't have to drink anything that we can't pronounce. I think that's a really important thing for you guys to know. If you can't pronounce it, put it back. It's just going to make you feel hungover. So with hops, we've got natural preservative, we've got natural sugars, sweet, blended together. Now we've got water malt hops. We've got a balance between sweetness and bitterness. we've created a wort, so we call our beer wort whilst we're making it. It's not beer till the end. And at the moment, our wort is nice and balanced, it's clean, and it's ready for the fourth ingredient, which is our yeast. The yeast is a single-cell microorganism, and when you add it to your wort, what it's going to do is it's going to start consuming all of the natural sugars that are found in the malt. And as it does so, it's releasing carbon dioxide and it's releasing ethanol, which is alcohol. So essentially it's turning that almost like grain flour soup into what we love as beer, the final product. Now, the strains of yeast that most people are using can basically be separated into two categories, and that's an ale yeast or a lager yeast. The difference is ale yeast love a warm temperature. They thrive in about 22 degrees Celsius. They float at the top of the tank. And being warmer, they ferment the wort a lot quicker, around 2.5 weeks to make an ale. A lager yeast prefers a colder temperature. It sits at the bottom of the tank, and at around 12 degrees Celsius, it'll ferment the beer in about 4 to 6 weeks. Flavor-wise, what you guys need to know as drinkers is if you choose an ale, or if you prefer to choose a lager, what you need to know is that because lager has been cold fermented, what you'll find is that you don't get so much flavor and aroma coming through from the hops, but what a lager will focus on is the clean, refreshing malt bill that's in that beer. Whereas the other way around, your ale might showcase the esters and the phenols a little bit better from your hops and be a little bit more of a flavorful beer. So it's totally up to you guys. It depends on what you're eating, what you're doing for the rest of the day, but I hope that helps you guys make a little bit more of an educated decision of what beers you're going to drink, when and where and why, and helps you enjoy them more. That was a kind of shit outro. So that wraps up this second part of the series, where we focus on ingredients. Next, we'll have a look at how do we actually chuck it all into the brew house to make the finished product. See you then.
You're doing so well.
I was feeling something, I don't know what.